Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here again to break down complex issues and pull out what really matters for you.
Especially if you're keeping track of daily UPSC mains current affairs. You know how sometimes things you wouldn't expect are connected?
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into something specific. The state of India's prisons. But with a twist.
Right. How these conditions are actually surprisingly affecting international legal stuff, specifically extradition requests.
It's a topic that could pop up in both mains and prelims, so definitely worth paying attention to.
And to get to the heart of it, we've been looking at recent reports, primarily the India Justice Report 2025, and also some pretty strong comments from former Supreme Court Justice Madan B. Lokur that was reported in The Hindu.
Yeah, so our mission today, our goal for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to figure out why prison conditions have suddenly become this major roadblock when India tries to bring back economic fugitives.
And what that means for India's reputation sort of on the world stage.
Okay, let's get into it. So what's the core connection here? Prisons and international law. How does that work?
Well, it's fascinating, really. There's now this direct line being drawn between how our prisons are run and whether other countries will send people back to face justice here.
You mean like legally send them back?
Exactly. Justice Madan B. Lokur, he put out this quite stark warning recently. He basically said, look, extraditions are going to be really difficult, much more difficult, until India genuinely improves its prison conditions.
And this isn't just academic, right? This hits right at India's efforts to extradite people like, say, Mehul Choksi, those big economic fugitive cases we hear about.
Precisely. It adds a whole new layer of difficulty to those legal fights. Something important to track for the exams, definitely.
And Justice Lokur, his voice carries weight internationally, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He chairs the UN Internal Justice Council. That's the body overseeing the UN's own justice system. So when he talks about rule of law or humane treatment, people listen, globally.
So his concerns about India's legal image, they're pretty serious then.
They really are. You can't just brush them off.
Did he mention a specific instance where this actually happened, like a real case?
Yes, he did. He pointed directly to a UK court decision. And this is where it gets, well, really concrete.
Okay.
The UK appellate court actually refused India's request to extradite a man named Sanjay Bhandari.
Sanjay Bhandari. Okay, remind us quickly, who is he and why is this UK decision so important here?
Right, so Bhandari is a defense consultant.
Yep.
India wants him on charges of tax evasion, money laundering, serious stuff.
Okay.
But the UK court said no, and the reason they gave was very specific. They said India couldn't give credible assurances about humane conditions in its jails.
Wow.
And they specifically mentioned Tihar jail in Delhi. The decision really rested on human rights principles, Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights.
The one prohibiting torture and inhuman treatment.
Exactly that one. The court felt sending Bhandari back, given the document conditions, could breach that fundamental right.
So it wasn't even about guilt or innocence on the charges themselves. It was purely about the prison environment he'd face. That's a key distinction, isn't it?
A crucial one. And the court apparently stressed that the Indian government hadn't provided those concrete assurances, even though they'd asked.
So it suggests a lack of trust, fundamentally.
That's how it looks, yes. It's not just a bureaucratic slip-up.
And Justice Lokur thinks this one case could affect many others.
He believes so. He mentioned it could have lasting negative effects on over 100 pending extradition requests India has out there.
100, that's significant.
It is, because if a major legal system like the UK raises these red flags, other countries are likely to pay attention, maybe even follow their lead. It really questions India's whole extradition strategy.
Now, the UK judgment, it didn't just talk generally, did it? It cited specific examples from inside Indian jails.
Yes, it did. And they're quite troubling examples. They really raise questions about safety and oversight.
Such as?
Well, one was the case of Christian Michel, the guy accused in the Augusta Westland scam. Apparently, he actually said he'd rather be in prison than accept restrictive bail conditions.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? If someone facing charges chooses prison over bail, it suggests the prison environment itself is seen as maybe not the worst option compared to something else, or perhaps the bail conditions were excessively harsh, but either way, it's a negative perception.
It's certainly a point the court noted. Then there was the brutal killing of Tilu Tujpuria inside Tihar jail.
I remember reading about that. Horrific.
And what the court highlighted, and what's really disturbing, is that it apparently happened in full view of CCTV cameras. And the guards allegedly didn't intervene effectively.
Which points to a massive failure in security and accountability.
And a potential breakdown.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the implication.
And there were other deaths mentioned too, tragically.
Yes. The judgment also referred to the deaths of Jagtar Johal and Ankit Gujar in custody. So it adds to this pattern of concern about custodial safety.
Taken together, it's a picture that international courts, when considering sending someone back, would find hard to ignore.
Exactly. And these individual cases, sadly, seem to point towards wider systemic problems, which is where the India Justice Report comes in.
Right. So to understand the roots of these concerns, we need to look beyond just these incidents. The India Justice Report 2025 that gives us the broader context.
Precisely. It offers that crucial data-driven view. It looks at the different pillars of the justice system: police, prisons, judiciary, legal aid.
Okay, let's start with the police then. They're often the first point of contact. What did the report find there that's relevant?
It points to some pretty big challenges system-wide. Like the police-to-citizen ratio, nationally it's low. Only about one officer for every 831 people.
That sounds stretched thin.
It does.
Oh.
And then things like CCTV. 17% of police stations nationally apparently don't have working CCTV, which is vital for accountability, right? And concerningly, 30% of stations still lack dedicated women's help desks. Plus, the ongoing issue of not meeting quotas for women officers across the board.
And how do these policing issues connect back to the prison conditions and extradition problem?
Well, you can see how issues at the start of the process, resource gaps, staffing issues, infrastructure problems in policing, could potentially contribute to pressures further down the line. It affects who ends up in the system, how investigations proceed, and ultimately adds to the burden on prisons.
Okay, makes sense. Now, shifting focus directly to the prisons themselves, what did the India Justice Report highlight there?
Some stark figures. Uttar Pradesh, for instance, reported the most severe overcrowding, which obviously strains everything: resources, living conditions.
Overcrowding is a classic symptom of a stress system.
Definitely. And then look at Delhi. 91% of its prison population are under trials.
91%. That's staggering. It means the vast majority haven't even been convicted.
Exactly. It points to huge delays in the justice system. People are held in these conditions, potentially for very long times, waiting for their cases to conclude.
That high under-trial number is particularly worrying in the extradition context we've been discussing, isn't it?
It really is. It suggests people could be held in potentially poor conditions for extended periods, regardless of eventual guilt or innocence. The report also mentioned Gujarat having high vacancy rates for high court judges and staff, which again contributes to backlogs and pressure on prisons indirectly.
So delays and vacancies feed into overcrowding and long waits and potentially bad conditions. It's all connected.
It seems so. And the report also looked at funding, the money side of things.
Ah, yes. What did it find about resources allocated to the justice system?
The numbers are quite revealing, maybe even shocking. Take Bihar as an example. 71% of lower court cases there have been pending for over 3 years. 71%. And their per capita spending. On the judiciary, just 182. On prisons, only 57. And on legal aid, just 6 euros per person.
6 rupees per person for legal aid? That's incredibly low.
It is. And maybe the most telling statistic. The report found no state in India allocates more than 1% of its total budget to the judiciary.
Less than 1% across the board. That paints a very clear picture of underprioritization, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests the system is operating under immense financial strain.
And how does this chronic underfunding loop back to the prison conditions and the extradition issues?
Well, if you look at those funding levels, it becomes pretty clear why things like essential infrastructure, decent healthcare, basic hygiene, reliable CCTV, maybe even adequate staffing and training in prisons might be lacking.
The money simply isn't there.
It seems not enough is allocated. This underfunding across the whole chain, police, courts, legal aid, prisons, inevitably impacts conditions on the ground. It fuels the delays, increases the under-trial population, and makes ensuring humane treatment incredibly difficult.
So bringing it all together for our listeners, especially the UPSC aspirants, it's not just about isolated incidents. It's a systemic problem. Under-resourced, overburdened systems are now creating real barriers for India internationally.
That's the crux of it. India is trying to pursue extraditions, but it's hitting this wall based on humanitarian concerns, not just legal arguments.
And courts in places like Europe and North America, they have pretty high standards for this.
They do. They operate under strict human rights frameworks and expect certain standards to be met.
And they're looking for specific improvements, not just vague promises.
Exactly. They want to see tangible progress, better infrastructure, healthcare, hygiene, reliable monitoring CCTV that works and is watched, and crucially, real accountability for prison staff to ensure inmate safety and well-being.
Without that kind of demonstrable change.
India's extradition goals will likely keep facing these hurdles, and it affects the country's overall standing in international legal circles. So what this means, really, is that a domestic issue prison reform has become a key factor in foreign policy and international law efforts.
Right. So the core takeaway here is that this internal challenge, the state of our prisons, is having major external consequences. It's directly impacting India's power to enforce its laws across borders, particularly in these significant economic cases.
Absolutely. And that echoes what Justice Lokur was stressing. Real, comprehensive prison reform, guaranteeing humane conditions. It's not just about doing the right thing domestically anymore. It's become critical for India's global image as a democracy that respects rights, and frankly, for achieving its own strategic goals like extradition.
It really forces us to think, doesn't it? Considering these findings, what does this say about the fundamental values a nation needs to embody, even internally, to be effective and respected on the global stage? How tightly linked domestic reality and international perception really are.
It's a deep connection.
Well, for all of you UPSC aspirants tuned in, we really hope this deep dive has given you a broader perspective. Seeing how governance, law, domestic policy, and international relations are all tangled together, that kind of understanding is so valuable for your preparation for mains and prelims.
We hope it sparks some thoughts.
Definitely. If you found this analysis helpful for your studies, please do give us a like, subscribe for more deep dives like this one, and drop a comment below. Let us know if you have questions or other topics you'd like us to tackle.
And just to reiterate, our discussion today drew heavily on reporting and analysis published in The Hindu.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.